Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel on space security norms and partnerships. So, we're on the cusp of a new space race, and some people might say we're already in the middle of a space race. This new space race is essentially marked by increasing collaboration and also competition among private space actors, but nations as well. We're also seeing increasing focus on certain areas, for example, lunar resource extraction. We're looking at outer space, deep space exploration, and also commercial space tourism as well. So those are some areas which we're looking at increasingly in this new era of space race. This is noticeably distinct from when we look at the previous space eras, which were there in the Cold War, which was marked by projects of national prestige. This is a bit different now. So essentially, we're seeing a buildup of space assets because the new space race is marked largely by commercial prospects, commercial considerations, and economic growth. So we're seeing the buildup of space assets in a big way. Now, these space assets are essentially, dual use in nature. They also have civilian purpose, but they also have a military application as well. And so they can also be used for hostile reasons as well. So going ahead, we're seeing now these space assets being integrated into the space arsenal of major space economies, but we're also seeing them become integral to the carrying of the statecraft as well. So essentially what this means is that we're on the cusp of astropolitics, which is increasing geopolitical contestation in space. And what that has led to is that we're seeing the potential for escalation of conflict in space as well. At the same time, we're seeing an increasing commercialization as well. So a lot of private space entrepreneurs have essentially developed space technologies in a rapid way. And as usual, as is the case, we have seen how sort of the law struggles to keep pace with the technology. And so international space law norms have still not clearly defined the contours of how do we sort of go about looking at this new space tech. So this panel is essentially going to be about looking at, where do we stand on space security? What role do multilateral norms have when it comes to sort of looking at space security? What are the areas of differences as well between all the nations as well? And number two, we'll also look at the role of private space, like all the private space entrepreneurs, private space enterprise, when it comes to this area as well. So with that, the first question I'd like to go to Ambassador Van Deelen. Ambassador Van Deelen, I wanted to know a little bit about the EU vantage point on space security and the correlation that has with the space safety, sustainability. We are seeing increasingly a large amount of cybersecurity attack on satellites. We're seeing, rendezvous and proximity operations being also happening. So the point is that space, which was supposed to be a global commons, a safe space, is not that safe anymore. So the EU has also, increasingly acknowledged this. They've come out with a strategy in 2023 when it comes to, I think, space security and defense. So where is the EU exactly on this topic of space security? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Konark, and thanks very much for having me. It's really a great pleasure to be in this fantastic conference. Indeed, as you say, the EU realized some 4 years ago that space is a strategic domain. Before that, we were very much focused on the civilian use of a civilian space program. You know the EU space program, Galileo, Copernicus, they're very well-known entities, and they were designed to be free, full, and open. And that world no longer is. We've came to realize that by deciding jointly with the 27 member states that we see space as a strategic domain. Out of that landmark realization came the strategy you mentioned. It came out in 2023, which is a strategy for space security and defense. So very much separate from what we do on the civilian side with the EU space program that is managed by the European Commission. And this strategy has 5 pillars. I'll briefly go through them. The first of them is to have a common understanding between EU member states of the threats that we face in space. And we do that in a classified way together with the services of our member states. We have a space threat landscape, so to make sure we have a common understanding of what we face. And what you mentioned is, of course, very much visible on that. It's the cyber, it's the potential use of RPOs, but it's also ASATs, which create a lot of debris and which could target our satellites. It's also a lack of transparency by some actors that doesn't give us confidence. So that's a starting point. Second element is the resilience and protection of the EU space program. So this very much relates to making sure we have launch capacities, that we have a vibrant industry, and also that we can develop future programs. Third one is related to our response to space threats. In order to respond, you need to be able to detect a threat, to characterize it, and then to also attribute before you can do a diplomatic response. EU being a civilian organization, we would always have a civilian response, a diplomatic response. Any military activity, if there were any, it will be through member states, but not through the EU as an organization. Then fourth is the use of space for security and defense. As I said, the programs in the past have been very much designed for civilian use. We know that security actors and defense actors make use of the data, but those were not designed for them. So we're working to get user requirements for military organizations in the EU and also civil protection organizations. And we've already embarked on 2 new elements of the EU space program. One is governmental SATCOM, the IRIS² program, for which the contract was signed last December. And we're working on a pilot for an Earth observation governmental service. So that is really also a deviation from the past. And the fifth one is partnering for norms, rules, and principles of responsible behavior. Because the normative basis that we have is too limited. And we really feel we need to work in the UN context in order to make sure that we have international agreements on how to keep space secure. And we do that together with our partners. So priority for us is now to implement the strategy. This is one thing of getting there with 27 member states. So we now is focus on the implementation. And for me in particular, it's on the normative side and it's on the partner side.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Ray, if I may come to you for a second. The UN has remained the forum for any multilateral debate on space safety and security. How do you look at the way India has viewed the discussions which have happened at the UN level, and how has India participated in those same discussions?
Yeah, thank you, Konark. Firstly, thank you to Rudra and to Carnegie India for organizing this and for inviting us. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Ambassador Venkatesh Verma somewhere in the audience. He's been a mentor to me and to many of us in this field. Very privileged to be on the panel with Mario, and the EU is one of our most important partners. And to someone like Anirudh, the future of India and my pension depend on how well he does as a space startup. The regulatory conversation on space at the international level is a very old one. At the current moment, the only regulatory framework is a cluster of treaties and understandings built around something called the Outer Space Treaty, which was negotiated in 1967. In 1967, there were 400 objects in space. And this was about 7 or 8 years after Sputnik. The entire use of space was for military purposes. Civilian use of space only came later. Today, we have 30,000 objects, in space, any number of say, what we call space junk, lots of debris. The number of space launches is at an unprecedented high. The cost of space launch has come down by 90%. Satellites today are small satellites, and you have constellations. So what it does is that it creates a regulatory challenge which the OST is inadequate to tackle. Now, since the origins of space of all space programs are, excepting the Indian one, I must add, are essentially military in nature. So the OST is a very peculiar treaty. When it came up in 1967, 14 of its provisions of its 17 articles are more or less drawn from the Antarctica Treaty. Okay, and the rest of them have some WMD, weapons of mass destruction obligations. Today, in space, you have thousands of satellites. Many of them are dual use. Okay, civilian space use has exploded. Space capacity is not universal. You know, there are about 190 countries in the world. About a dozen have any meaningful space capacity in the sense that they have all the verticals of space capacity: launch, satellite fabrication, satellite operation, satellite applications, and SSA. So there are multiple conversations going on. How do you reconcile the military aspects with the civilian aspects? The space economy today is about according to McKinsey, about $630 billion. It's expected to go up to around $2 trillion in the next 10 years. When the Outer Space Treaty came up, there was no possibility of, say, asteroid mining, of human habitation in space, manufacturing in space, energy production in space. Okay, and these are very real possibilities now. So how do you reconcile these two? So the Indian approach is that we participate in these conversations. We are conscious of the fact that that we have space ambition, and we have the record in some ways of delivering on many of these aspirations in space. A number of conversations are underway, but broadly they can be divided into what we call the Geneva track and the Vienna track. The Vienna track deals with safety issues, and the Geneva track deals with security issues. So what we have in Vienna there's a series of principles have come up called the long-term sustainability guidelines, which look at how you avoid debris and how you sort of move in space without space traffic management, essentially. Okay. So these are the issues there. On the military side, there are two essentially. There are the fiercest arms race currently underway is in space. If you take out space capacities, you go back to being a 20th century military. It's a space capacity today that determines where you stand in terms of military ability. It's the strongest enabler today. So that produces a number of issues. I can come back to them in my next answer. But we are determined to be a part of the solution and not the problem. We want to work more with partners like Mariolin and the European Union, all other players in space, and also to take into account the interests of our growing private sector and our national space agency, ISRO. Thank you.
Ambassador, if I have a small follow-up. Essentially, the thing is that the perception seems to be that the UN could do more to perhaps catch up with the evolution and the breakthroughs in the tech. So the international space law has not really kept up pace when it comes to the evolution of breakthroughs in technologies in space. How effective is the UN in tracking all these breakthroughs, which you mentioned about, a 90% drop in the cost launch and all these issues? How effective has the UN been as a forum for not just discussions on regulations, but also on tracking the tech as well?
Yes, you cannot consider space in isolation. It's one of the emerging technologies that's coming out, whether it's biotech or bioengineering and so on, artificial intelligence, robotics, cyber. Space is one of this clutch of emerging technologies that's coming. All of them face regulatory challenges. The AI regulation. There's no way that you can anticipate what's going to come up because you don't know whether autonomy is going to happen or whether when it's going to happen or what it looks like. Similarly, in space, it's very likely that we'll be it's a stated ambition. The U.S. government, for instance, its stated objective is colonization of the solar system. It's in one of their space policy directives. Okay. I mean, how do you approach something like that? There have been attempts in the past to say designate space as a province of all humanity and so on. It's similar to what was done in the Antarctica Treaty when the concept of global commons was terrestrial. Okay, so we are facing challenges on a scale, I think, which is unprecedented in humanity. The only thing I can think of is of the papal bull of the 15th century, which divided the world into two, half for Spain and half for Portugal. Okay, so it's a challenge on that scale, and the UN is the best platform we have. The UN is only as good as the resources that are available to it, or what the member states bring to bear. It cannot outrun that.
So Anirudh, I mean, as Ambassador mentioned earlier on, space was something which was largely the, sole preserver of the military activities a long time back. Lately, we have seen some civilian aspects as well. But commercial considerations into space is a new thing altogether. How have you gone about building, capabilities on that front in essentially what seems to be an area where there's been largely sovereign functioning? How has Digantara gone about sort of, approaching that?
Thank you, Konark, for having me here. So to answer the question around how has commercial sector evolved itself, and then the navigating of policies and building something in commercial space mainly happened because of the innovation, and the cost of launching to space has become much cheaper these days. So having said that, space was one sector that was mostly military in nature when it started. But then we have more than 70% satellites in orbit today that are purely commercial. Out of 13,000 active satellites at this point in time, more than 7,000 or even 8,000 are just commercial satellite players operating constellation of satellites. This change was not expected in the past. So the regulations did not change drastically from back then to now with all the innovation that is happening. So I see private sector to be more like an tech enabler and not a policy driver for a lot of things. So we just help towards accelerating a lot of technologies that are necessary for both civil and military applications. For instance, when we started Digantara, we started this company as a company that focuses on tracking objects in space and building a catalog that can support commercial space operations purely. But we didn't know the fact that military has a huge application around this when we started. Today, most of the work that we do, probably more than 80% that we do is for military, not for commercial use case, by tracking every single thing that is happening in orbit. That is also because of being in the right time at the right place. With all the geopolitics going around the world, space has become more imperative in terms of sovereignty, national infrastructure as well. So we support most military agencies today, balancing out on like at the policy level by helping them track adversary satellite activities, and also support and a lot of military applications that can be derived out of space. The last part is the fact that space itself today is going towards becoming more and more commercial in nature. What was science fiction in the past is no more science fiction. We're talking about commercial human space flights and a lot of in-orbit activity, which means there is a need for infrastructure, just like we have one for aviation sector, which means somebody has to build for a solution to understand every single space activity. So that's something that we are focusing on today, because going further down, when we have around 60, 70,000 satellites, this will be more important from the standpoint of operations. And like Ambassador Ray mentioned, there is no way you can draw boundaries in space. So everything is more like a common good, and whoever launches first gets that particular orbit. So it's called the orbit carrying capacity. So, like given that fact, with Geo and Leo, there are different dynamics in nature. For Geo, we have more like an orbit carrying capacity concept. Inherently, people think space is infinite, but it is pretty much finite. The usable space is pretty much finite. So the number of satellites that are going up is significantly high. In just last 3 years, we've seen six-fold increase in satellites, which means there needs to be an understanding where a public organization works very closely with private organization to accelerate the technology development to support the needs and the growth of this industry, and that's what we are supporting mostly.
How does that happen in practice, Anirudh? How do you actually go about working with the public organizations? What does that look like on the ground?
So when we started initially, it was very difficult to create awareness around something like space situational awareness, which was purely military. And like even at this point in time, a lot of countries view space situational awareness just to be military in nature. Like, Europe today focuses more on civilian use cases of space, but America and Russia, China sees more military in nature. So when we work with these organizations, we balance out their needs. So for example, today for India, we're working with both civil and military use cases. With ISRO, we are focusing mostly on providing collision avoidance and tracking of objects. But for defense, it's mostly towards understanding adversary satellite activity. The same thing is happening in the US as well. US maintains the largest catalog today of space objects, but the catalog is not enough because it only tracks 30,000 objects, while we have more than 900,000 objects. So our role comes into picture in two levels. One, in ensuring we work with the policymakers, where they can regulate something like air traffic management, but for space, by having a single agency who is buying all this data and maintaining a catalog, providing service through this regulatory arm for all the satellite operators who are launching satellites to space. Just the best example is UK at this point in time. UK does this through the regulatory arm, where if any satellites are to be launched from UK, they provide all the services that are associated with space situational awareness through the policy agency or the regulatory arm, who predominantly purchases data from commercial companies like us. The same thing we've seen in other sectors like marine domain awareness, aviation sectors, where we have precedents from the past. We're following the same footprints, but here the only complexity is we can't draw that virtual borders as well, which is where we have to be global in nature. Even if we are a commercial company based out of India, we today operate in multiple countries, follow the rules of the local country that we are operating, and then providing services accordingly.
Ambassador Van Deelen, you mentioned in your answer the 5 key priorities of the EU when it comes to space security. So my question here is, what does that look like in practice in terms of the implementation? When we're talking about sort of application of those particular pillars, how do you go about engaging in different forums? So we have the UN, but we also have the open-ended working group as well on the prevention of armed race in outer space. So what does it look like when you're engaging at different forums? And my second part of the question is, where are the area of differences with different countries? Do different regions have different vantage points? Do they have different opinions on what space security looks like?
Okay, thanks for that question. I think the last one I need to think about a little bit, and I don't think it's a regional approach. It may be country-specific more than anything else, if there is. But in general, I have an idea that there's a very good perception across EU member states of the threats that we face and the need for action. And we see that by the very large support for the resolutions that were adopted in this respect in the first committee in New York for a couple of years now, and a process that we had on a previous open-ended working group on norms, rules, and principles of responsible behavior in outer space, which included discussions between member states on threats and on different threat perceptions. And it included representatives from civil society and from the private sector. And this very inclusive dialogue, I think, is key to have if you want to get anything done. What it looks like otherwise, I think my good friend Anupam set it out very eloquently, what we do in Vienna and in Geneva. In Vienna, focusing much more on safety, so on SST, on space traffic management. Those are really important topics to get done. The EU looks more at regional approaches to space traffic management. But we very much agree that we need some sort of international framework in order to deal with who goes where at what time and the right of way, etc., that we have in all other areas of transportation. On the security side in Geneva, I very much meet with Anupam every time I'm there. We were both together in the first session of a new series of open-ended working groups that took place actually the past week in Geneva. We both came from there. And unfortunately, in that session, we really saw geopolitics play out. In 5 days, these diplomats did not manage to agree on an agenda even for this 4-year process. And that was because there was one country that was blocking the agenda. All other countries there were ready to agree. So the current geopolitical context makes it very difficult to come to agreements, especially to come to agreements fast. I think the way we did arms control in the last decades is not how we'll be able to do it now. And that means we're really looking for partners. So we do outreach when we go to these meetings. We speak to as many people as we can, both like-minded countries and not so like-minded countries. For diplomats, it's key to be in touch with everyone, to understand concerns, to listen to them, and to be able to explain our views and positions. But more focusedly, we have a number of dialogues on space and space security with a few key countries. And I'm really hoping India will be next. So far, we have one with the US and with Japan, with NATO. We have a space security dialogue with Korea and Australia. And for many other countries, we have space as an agenda item in broader political and security and defense dialogues. But I think this topic, given its importance, really merits a direct dialogue between our two countries. So that's why I'm here. I'm hoping we can set that up.
Thank you, Ambassador Bhandari. And Ambassador Ray, just a similar question for you as well. You mentioned that India has a knack for delivering at these multilateral fora. Can you give an example of how India has managed to bring together stakeholders, or what is the specific role India chooses to play in these multilateral fora?
Well, thank you. I mean, before I come to that, I think Mayolin, my good friend, has raised some very interesting issues. See, conceptually in space, you have to distinguish between arms control in space and regulation in space. Okay, the conversations often get confused. So what you do to prevent an arms race in space or is related to, but is different from what you do to regulate what's happening in space. So a very good instance is raised by what Anirudh has said. The capacities that you use for space situational awareness are called space domain awareness when it comes to the military, but it's the same capacities. Okay, it's exactly the same thing. When you use it for military objectives, it's called space domain awareness. Now, when you come to this arms race bit of it, so let's for a moment keep aside the regulation part of it. The problems that we face sometimes intersect. For instance, if you have orbiting debris in space, and debris in lower Earth orbit, I think goes at the speed of something like 30,000 kilometers an hour. Even a fleck hits a satellite, it's gone. All right, so it's a serious issue. It's a serious issue. Amongst other things, it affects our space launch windows. Now, is this a security issue or is this a safety issue? Okay, we believe it's a safety issue, but there are countries which believe that it's a security issue. There's also, as I said, a fierce arms race underway in space. It's determined by how much you can spend, what your technological capacities are, what your ambitions are. And in this, in the effort to contain this arms race, there are two approaches. Essentially, there's one group of countries, principally China and Russia, which say that, this is a process born out of President Reagan's Star Wars initiative, which said that there should not be any weapons in space. That you should not weaponize space. Non-aggressive military uses of space is legal. Okay, so the use of space for military purposes which are non-aggressive in nature is legal. So now there are capacities coming up for space warfare or orbital warfare. Is that legal or is it not legal? These are, say, some of the questions that arise. There is another approach which is sort of championed by the United States, by UK, by the European Union, by many European countries, by Japan and others, which is called the responsible behaviors approach. Now, this is something which is another approach to arms control. It focuses on unintended escalation. So one of the pillars of that is a ban on ASAT testing. We have participated in those conversations as well, like we participate in the conversations on the placement of weapons approach. We believe that the responsible behavior approach has its merits. So we have to work with everyone, and this is we are in for the long haul. Now you talked about how India contributes. The space arms race is a difficult conversation, but let me take you to Vienna for a minute. The long-term sustainability guidelines, which is one of the most important multilateral products that has come up in space, was actually produced by a committee in which India chaired. Okay, so we have a record in bringing about sort of multilateral consensus on these issues. I mean, the last point I'd like to make is that there's an American author called Michael Crippen who writes about space. So he says that whenever there's arms control happening, there are two conversations going on. One is actually about the weapons, the other is about the narrative. And if you are unable to compromise, then the next thing, then the fiercest battle is about who's to blame. All right. As a country like India, which we believe that we are a pole in a multipolar world, and I actually think we are, or we will be very soon. It is important for us not to get sort of taken in by this narrative battle. We believe that all approaches, including responsible behaviors, have its merits. We are glad that Mariolin is here, and we would like to work with them more in developing these ideas. Thank you.
Anirudh, so the private sector has clearly been at the forefront of developing some vital space technologies, right? But it has done so often in close coordination with the government as well. So the IDEX in the Ministry of Defense has a few challenges which they run and announce. So that's how one way the space sector has worked with the government as well. But at the same time, the same companies also work with, say, the US Space Force. So have you seen, or can you speak for the private sector in terms of, are there any challenges when it comes to working with two different set of governments, and how does that impact space security?
So firstly, I think space is global in nature. So as a sector itself, when you start a company within the space industry, you have to be global from day one. You can't be serving one particular market to become a billion-dollar company, because in this sector, you also need a lot of funding to start with, which means you need to raise venture capital money or should be funded by the government. So the first step to this approach is to work closely with these defense challenges and few accelerated programs where you get that first foot into the door by working with these government agencies. Secondly, what we've done at Digantra is basically take a different approach where we started to solve for understanding how local regulations work and how can we solve for it locally than focusing on one single company in one particular part of the world. For instance, we have our company based in India, Singapore, and the US. For the US market, we use our US entity to solely focus towards DoD programs and serve for the US military market, because the regulatory framework is very different when it comes to space military aspect. So we have American citizens working in our US entity to solve for that problem of Indian company not being able to access US markets directly. That's one part. The second part is mostly on the civil application and the commercial use case side, where again, because the nature of the sector is such that the end customer for every satellite operator today in the world is mostly a government agency, which also brings commercial entities or commercial companies working with another country's company to follow the local government regulations around working with their own company than the outside company. So when we started Digantra, we didn't have a lot of access to the US. While it was easier to work with European companies, it was very difficult to work with the United States because of a lot of export control regulations and paperwork associated with that also impacts timeline on technology development. Having said that, US being the largest market within the space industry for any commercial company, it was very important for us to solve for having an entity there to be able to access a larger portion of the market. So that's how we went about approaching this particular problem. With that, a lot of private companies today, like although they are working on, bridge programs like INDESX, where you have India, US coming together, giving a challenge and working on it. It is still not happening at scale where a commercial company can rely on this totally. So it's just a foot into the door, but then you have to figure out yourself. So I personally think that the models that we have today, be it with ISET, INDESX, is not a scalable model. And we've not seen that scale even with IDEX challenge yet, like at least within the space industry, because when you're doing something like this challenge, there needs to be a further roadmap around how can you change this from a challenge to a technology that is adapted for the military or for that particular end user. That adaptation is still a problem. So until we solve for that, you don't see anything happening at scale out of these programs. While you still have to be focused on becoming that one defense contractor who is focused towards solving bigger problems than these smaller challenges.
We have a few minutes left, so I think I have space for one more question. So, Ambassador Van Deelen, this is to you. As I said at the beginning of this panel discussion, we're entering an era of astropolitics, highly contested, and a lot will depend on partnerships, alliances, and norms. The EU College of the Commissioners was in India recently, including the EU Commissioner for Defense and Space. They spoke about possibly doing something as a partnership with India. What would collaboration on space security with India look like in the future?
Yeah, indeed. The visit of the College of Commissioners, I think, was a key moment, and that really shows how the EU is interested in cooperating with India in many, many fields, but including space. And I think space was specifically mentioned at those discussions. I work at the EES, which is the diplomatic and defense arm of the EU. And we cooperate very closely with what's called DG DEFIS of the Commission that runs the EU space program. And the strategy that I mentioned is something that is implemented jointly by the two of us. We would really see merit in coming jointly to India to sit down and to look across all these areas of work, how we can best cooperate with the Indian partners. So as I mentioned, that would look like, as a start, a dialogue where we sit down, speak on many issues related to running space programs, but also to space security. And as you mentioned before, space is a global commons. So as EU, we really believe that we need to solve the challenges we face jointly with other countries. And India would be an excellent partner for that. We also, the way the EU works, when we set up a partnership, it's a partnership. It's based on mutual interest. We're in there for the long haul. We work on it step by step. That is how we operate, and that is what we really like to do in India.
Thank you. With that, we're almost at the end of our time. I guess the main takeaway seems to be that, discussions are ongoing, space is evolving, the tech, the regulation, everything else. All I'll say is I'll close with watch this space. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.